Adrian resisted the urge to bite the skin around his fingernails as he stared at the bakery. Just now, Alia, Marinette, Alex, Rose and Julika had all been akumatized. It had been tough fighting the 5 of them, but he and Ladybug had won, and now the girls had returned to see Marinette. He wasn't sure what had got them akumatized in the first place, but from what they had said while under Shadow Moth's influence, it was clear they were angry with her. His lady was trying her best, despite the majority of their class now hating her after she had reportedly threatened Lila, in addition to throwing her down the stairs. She spent most of their lessons looking like she was about to burst into tears, and he would quickly take her hand in his under the desk. He saw it as his way of giving her some semblance of comfort while Miss Bustier was talking, but it was possible Marinette viewed it as a reminder to cheer up or she'd be akumatized, because a moment later, the tears would be gone from her eyes and she'd smile at him. None of this was good for her mental health, both her friends abandoning her and having to pretend you were okay all the time because Ladybug couldn't get akumatized. He knew he had the same risk on him, but despite Lila's lies and his affiliation with Marinette, the rest of the class would still talk to him. His mood was much more stable in comparison to hers. Marinette had been trying for a couple of weeks now to get her best friends to talk to her, and she managed to invite them all over to the bakery, only for Aurora to get akumatized back into stormy weather this morning. The other 5 girls had to have lunch without Marinette, and judging from what his classmates had said while they were akumatized, they were certain Marinette was hiding something from them. Thankfully, the girls had made their way back to the bakery after Ladybug and Cat Noir had saved them, but Adrian was nervous. How was this conversation going to go? "If you don't stop moving your leg, I will throw up camembert all over you." Adrian smiled down at his Kwame, who had stuck his head out of the pocket of his jeans. "Sorry, Plag, I'm just nervous. She has to lie to them. She can't tell them her secret, but if they realise she's lying to them, it'll only make them believe Lila more. And how is you sitting in the park going to change any of that? In case she needs me." Although Adrian wasn't sure what side of him Marinette would call upon. They had been texting a lot since the rest of her friends had abandoned her. They weren't particularly deep or meaningful conversations, but they could spend a while texting back and forth, talking about how boring his photo shoots were, or he'd send her a line of Mandarin and she'd try to work out what he said to her. He usually tried to make her laugh though, but that was easier when he was Cat Noir. Ladybug had been calling on him more too, upping their patrols from twice a week to 4. She had told him about Hawkmoth's newfound acquisition and his changing powers, so they had needed to up their patrolling, but he knew it was because she was lonely too, and didn't want to bother Adrian all the time. He so badly wanted to tell her that he would do anything for his lady, be there whenever he could for her, in whatever form she called on him for help. He was sat on one of the benches in the park that was closest to the bakery, and he heard the bell above the door ding. He turned around, making sure he was hidden as Alia, Marinette, Alex, Rose and Julika all left the bakery, looking utterly betrayed. The 5 girls didn't say anything at all, but whatever Marinette had said to them, it certainly had not gone well. Adrian took out his phone, waiting for it to sound with either a text or a call, and kept staring up at the bakery. He wanted nothing more than to be with Marinette right now. She was all alone. Well, she wasn't. She had Tiki still, not to mention an entire miracle box full of Kwames now, but surely none of them understood how she was feeling right now. As he kept watch on the bakery though, he noticed a flash of pink light on the top floor, and then he saw Ladybug above the rooftops a moment later. Now wasn't the time for Adrian. She needed her kitty. The model dashed down the nearest alleyway. "Plag, did you have enough time to recharge?" The Kwame phased out of his pocket and nodded. "She needs you, I guess." "She does. Claws out." As soon as the transformation was complete, Adrian heard his baton beep with a new message. He took it out and pressed play to listen. "Hey Kitty, it's me." Obviously. She laughed then, sounding a little nervous, but despite her laughter, he could hear the tremor of tears in her voice. "I was wondering, if you weren't too busy, if you could meet me, now, where we usually meet for patrol, but not for patrol. I just want to talk, but it's okay if you can't." The message ended and he just stared at his baton. Why was she so unsure he'd meet her? And why hadn't she called Adrian instead? He was certain she would call upon his civilian self instead. Ladybug had never mentioned to him her troubles at school since they had to keep their identities a secret. What did she not want Adrian to know? Or rather, what did she feel Cat Noir could help her with that Adrian couldn't? He sent her a quick text, telling her he'd be there soon. Then he ran to the nearest ice cream parlour. He didn't know what was going on, but she would definitely need cheering up. Having to fight your friends wasn't very nice, akumatized or not. 2 small tubs of ice cream in hand, Cat Noir precariously clambered up onto the rooftops and started making his way to their meeting spot. For patrols, he usually met Ladybug on a building opposite the Eiffel Tower, and she was already there, sat on the rooftop, out of view from the street so Parisians wouldn't disturb her. She sat on the ledge, legs crossed, and when she heard him land on the roof, she turned around and gave him a small smile. "Hey," she said. She sounded even closer to tears now he was here. "Hey, Bugaboo. I brought ice cream. You seem sad in your message." She bit her lip, staring down at the tubs, and shook her head. I can't." "It's not from Andre," he said. Now wasn't the time to get lover's ice cream with her. "I know. It's not that. I messed up." He sat down beside her, straddling the ledge so he was facing her, while she looked out at the Eiffel Tower. The sun was beginning to set, the dying rays reflecting on the tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm sure it's not that bad. And what are you talking about? The fight went well." She nodded. "Yes, but after... I know you don't know much about me, because I won't let you know. But those 5 girls who got akumatized are my friends, and they were akumatized because of me, because they know I'm lying to them. There's this other girl I go to school with. She's been making up lies about me because we both like the same boy, and they believe her over me. I've spent weeks trying to get them to talk to me, but they were already suspicious, and then I had to leave because of a roar, and I couldn't tell them why. So after we purified the Akuma, they came back to see me, and..." Ladybug's shoulders shook, like she was crying, but no tears fell. "Alia, Lady Wi-Fi. I told her. I had to tell her. If I didn't, she'd only believe this other girl more, and I only have one friend, and I'm sad all the time, and I feel so lonely, and I'm scared I'll be akumatized, and..." "Ladybug," he said, cutting her off. If she kept going, she would have a panic attack. "What did you tell her?" He had a feeling he already knew what she was going to say, but he needed to hear it. She finally turned to him and made eye contact. "I told her I was Ladybug." She really did start crying then, and she moved closer to him on the ledge, knocking the 2 tubs of ice cream onto the roof. "I am so sorry. You should have been the first to know, not her. You've been asking to know for a whole year now. This isn't fair on you." He just nodded, unsure of what to say. He knew she hadn't done this to hurt him, and he knew he already knew her identity. But it still felt like she had betrayed him because she hadn't told him first, the person she was supposed to trust more than anyone else. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why her?" She sniffed and wiped away some of her tears. I couldn't take it anymore. After Master Fu leaving, and this stuff that's been happening at my school, and then my friends gave me an ultimatum, I felt like she gave me no choice. She was just there. So I blurted it out. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to tell someone. I couldn't hold it in. He understood. The burden of their secret identity was a lot to bear. Plus she had the miracle box now. On top of everything she had to deal with already, he wasn't surprised she had finally buckled under the pressure when her friends who hated her got akumatized. Even though he'd been there for her, both as Cat Noir and Adrian, Marinette nor Ladybug had been able to be honest about how she was truly feeling and what she was going through, because her identity had to be secret. And even though it seemed no matter what he did, Marinette wouldn't have told him what was truly going on until she reached her absolute breaking point. He felt like he was the one who had caused all of this. He hadn't stayed away from Marinette despite what Lila had said on the train to London, and even though he'd got Marinette back into school, Lila had manipulated that situation too, because of what he'd said to her. This was all his fault. "What do we do now?" he asked, voice quiet. Not because he was angry with Ladybug and he was trying to hold it in, but because he felt guilty. About Alia. Ladybug sniffed again. "Well, I don't think we need to worry. She didn't believe me. She shouted at me. She said she didn't want to believe that I was a liar, but pretending I was Ladybug was the last straw for her." That made sense. Alia idolized Ladybug. She ran the Ladybug after all. She wouldn't even think Marinette, who Alia had been influenced into believing was a liar, was Ladybug. Even if Adrian still saw how brilliant Marinette was. "Do you hate me?" Ladybug asked. She had stopped crying, but there were still tears in her eyes. He shook his head. No. How could he ever? Of course, he wished she had told him first, but this hadn't been done to hurt him. Marinette had been desperate. She narrowed her eyes in confusion. "But I told someone before you. It should have been you first." Cat Noir sighed. He had to tell her he knew. He couldn't keep lying to her. She needed someone who was completely there for her, and if he told her he knew her identity as Cat Noir, she could properly confide in him about everything that was hurting her. Of course, after she told him, he might be the one she ended up hating for hiding this from her for so long, but he needed to tell her. And there might be a chance she would be relieved by it, which would ward off any Akumas coming for her. My lady, I already know who you are. She just stared at him for a moment, then asked, when? How? Thankfully, she didn't sound hurt. You'll kill me when I tell you. She shuffled even closer to him. Tell me anyway? Dark Owl. Ladybug broke eye contact, looking to the side as she tried to remember. They'd faced a lot of Akuma villains since then, but the moment she remembered, she gasped. You opened your eyes, didn't you? I did. I couldn't help myself. I had to know. I'm sorry. She still looked confused. But that was months ago. I know I should have told you sooner. Not that. Well, yes, you should have. But all this time? You knew who I was. Why did you flirt with me? It was his turn to be confused. What do you mean? You can't be in love with me now you know who I am. I love you more because of it. She just shook her head. You can't be. Why? How? I'm nothing like Ladybug. Cat Noir narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? Sure, you're a little quieter and more accident-prone, but my lady is still there. Your costume isn't what makes you Ladybug. It's your kindness, Marinette. At the mention of her real name, she gasped, the tears becoming more prominent in her bluebell eyes, and the sight, combined with what she had been saying, broke Adrian's heart. Even though she didn't love Cat Noir, she truly didn't believe he could love her if he knew who she truly was. No wonder she had stepped aside when Alia had told her about Lila. Marinette had probably thought she had no chance with Adrian, but if she could just let herself see it, she would find out that he loved her back. What had Lila done to his lady? And being the guardian too. The extra responsibilities had stressed her out too much, and Lila had been slowly chipping away at her self-esteem. And at the same time, her friends and their classmates, who had all known Marinette for years, had taken Lila's side, and it was slowly destroying the amazing girl he was so lucky to know. You... She stopped, her voice thick with unshed tears. You still love me? Even though you know I'm Marinette? He smiled. Yes. I think I always will. Spots off. His smile got wider when he saw Marinette sat in front of him on the roof, red Kwame on her shoulder. He reached up and gently cupped her cheek. There's my lady. She let out a sob, and then she wrapped her arms around him and curled herself into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her too, holding her tight. He didn't want to let her go. Marinette deserved nothing less than to know how loved she truly was. She did so much for this city, and she had done so much for him too. She had been one of his first ever friends, both as Marinette and Ladybug, and she had made his life so much more wonderful, even before he had found out they were the same person. He felt her crying against his chest, and he looked down, concerned. He knew it wasn't healthy for Marinette to keep all of her emotions inside, but they couldn't risk an Akuma. Princess, he said, switching to the name Cat Noir used to Marinette. You can't be crying. I'm not, she said, voice mumbled. Well, I am, but I'm not sad. I'm happy. She falls out with a hug and smiled at him, wiping away her thankfully happy tears with the back of her hand. You're not mad at me that I knew and didn't tell you? You should have told me, but I'm not angry. I'm happy, you know. He smiled. Tiki was very concerned. Marinette looked at her Kwame. You knew? Yes. I was in that storage container too. Marinette nodded. Right, of course. Don't worry, I made sure he wouldn't hurt you, and I think he's done a good job. I think he has too, Marinette said with a smile. She already seemed to be acting more like herself. Even though telling Alia had been a bad decision, it seemed to have helped in a sense that she'd been able to get a lot off her chest about how she was feeling. Should I tell you my identity, he asked. Marinette shook her head. It's too dangerous. Let's keep yours a secret, just in case I get akumatized. And if I do, Kwame will come and get you so you can hide the miracle box. And if you get akumatized again, I can hide the miracle box. If I get akumatized again, he asked. It had only been one word, but in this context, it was a heavy one. When was I ever akumatized? She looked away from him. Kitty, Marinette, tell me, now. He was trying his best to stay calm, but he knew she could hear the anger in his voice. She shouldn't have kept this from him. I'm not sure about the events that caused it. Bunnix came to get me. She's the only one who knows. But I'd done something wrong, and as a result, you got akumatized into Cat Blanc. You had the ultimate power of destruction. You split the moon in half. You flooded Paris. She bit her lip. You killed me. Cat Noir just stared at her. I killed you? She grabbed one of his hands. I'm sure it was a mistake, that you didn't mean it, but only Bunnix knows how it happened. But that's why I was reluctant to tell you how sad I was feeling and get close to you, in case it happened again. Like I said, I don't know how you got akumatized, but Cat Blanc knew I was Marinette. Then, won't it happen again, he asked, getting anxious now. He couldn't imagine himself killing anyone, let alone Marinette, but she wouldn't lie about this. I don't know. The first time Mr. Damocles was akumatized happened months before the mistake I made, when Bunnix came to get me. She would have been to see you if your actions had a negative impact on the future. Have you seen her? He shook his head. Only the once, when Chris came from the future. She didn't mention anything to me about what I'd done. I guess it's okay then. But I should have told you sooner, she said, squeezing his hand. Yes, you should have, he said, raising his voice slightly. Although he understood why she didn't. Seeing that must have been so traumatizing, and she'd been protecting him by not telling him, and also trying to prevent it from happening again, which was hard to do when she didn't even know what had caused it. Being the Guardian had been causing her a lot of stress, as had what was going on with Alia and Lila, as well as the upsetting secret of Cat Blanc. Keeping all of this to herself had only made everything so much worse. Sorry, you shouldn't have kept that to yourself. All of these secrets are only going to hurt us. I agree. From now on, no more secrets apart from your identity and the location of the miracle box. There's nothing else you're hiding from me? She shook her head. No, that was everything. Good. You're really not angry with me? She asked, looking a little shy. She was too cute. No, you should have told me sooner about Cat Blanc though. She nodded in agreement. It gave me nightmares. Another reason why she'd been so stressed. Come here. He held out his arms for her and she curled herself back against his chest, accepting his hug. You haven't been sleeping well then, he asked, and she shook her head. Do you think you will now you've told me everything? Maybe, she said, the word mumbled again. He scooped her up with ease, standing with her princess style in his arms. Tiki, you ready? The Kwame phased into Marinette's coin purse, and his classmate looked up at him. Where are we going? I'm taking you home. You know I can transform and get there myself. I know. Just let me do this for you. Without any hesitation, Marinette nodded and wrapped her arms around his neck and shoulders. He took his time, though, enjoying the feeling of her in his arms. She was so precious to him. He didn't want anything bad to happen to her. How could he have killed her? He didn't understand. He wouldn't hurt her. Not ever. He tightened his grip on her as he landed on another roof, and she looked up at him. Kitty, is there something wrong? I was just thinking about Cat Blanc. You know I never hurt you, right? She nodded with a smile. I know. She nuzzled her head into his chest then, showing she trusted him. He only hoped she couldn't feel how fast his heart was beating beneath his suit. He took off running again, and eventually jumped onto her balcony. He set her down gently on the roof and held open the skylight for her. You should get to bed. The sun's only just set, she said with a chuckle. Yes, I know, but there were 2 Akuma attacks today, and it's been emotional for you. Get some good rest now. We can talk more later. I have school tomorrow. I guess you do too. Maybe after dinner, I'll have finished my homework. You can come over? We could have a movie night? Cat Noir smiled. I'd love that. He'd never seen a movie with a friend before. He'd got close with Marinette, but his bodyguard getting akumatized had put a stop to that. Even so, it had been an amazing day. I'll come by tomorrow just after 7, but if you need me before that, or after, for whatever, just call me. I'll be here for you. She looked a little nervous, like she wasn't certain she wanted to accept help. She had been like that with Adrian, not texting him until she got too upset to handle it alone. Are you sure? I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't. What will I say? He shrugged. I need you. She smiled, although it didn't quite meet her eyes, but he could tell she wasn't faking her expression. She was certainly feeling better than when he'd first arrived with the ice cream, but she wasn't completely okay either. It was alright. They'd get there. Okay. Thank you, Kitty. Good night. He returned her smile and kissed her on the forehead. Good night, Princess. He took her hand and helped her in through the skylights, and once it was shut, he went over to the railings and looked over at Notre Dame. He needed a moment to think before he left. He had killed her. He knew he didn't remember. To him, in this timeline, it had never happened. He had never hurt her. But the very thought that he was capable of hurting the girl he was in love with to the point where he ended her life. He gripped the railing, claws digging into his palms. He knew he never would, but he could. He did. He had killed her. But once again, she had saved him and the rest of the world. He didn't have to live in a reality where he had destroyed her, because she had rescued him. Again, he needed to focus on that, not something he had zero memory of, but showing Marinette how amazing she was. Him being akumatized only proved that. She had saved everyone single-handedly, and she had kept it all to herself so he wouldn't have to dwell on what a future version of him had done to her, at the cost of her own mental state. He needed to work out a way for her to cope with all of this better, and at the same time show her how amazing she was. If only she could see what he saw in her. The first thing Adrien had done when he'd woken up was transform into Cat Noir to check his baton for any messages, much to Plag's displeasure. There wasn't anything waiting for him, either from Marinette or Ladybug, and his phone was devoid of any text from her too. Surely that meant things were okay? Or perhaps not. As proven by last night, she hid things from him to save his feelings. He de-transformed so he could get dressed, but halfway to his wardrobe, he ran back to the television and turned it on. What if she hadn't texted him because she had been akumatized? He flipped through a few of the channels, stood there in his pyjamas, but there was nothing about a new Akuma. If you don't calm down, she'll hear about you being akumatized on the news instead, Plag said, and with a sigh, Adrien sat beside him on the sofa. I know. I'm just worried about her. I don't even know how long she's been keeping me getting akumatized secret. The effect that must have had on her. Plag nodded, looking a little sad about it too. She'll be okay, kid. I hope you're right. I can't do anything about Cat Blanc now, and I'm going over tonight for that film, so if she needs help with Guardian stuff, I can ask then. Plus we can relax together and she can talk to me about anything she's stressed about, and I'm going to speak to Lila this morning. Plag crossed his tiny arms. Is that a good idea? What if you make this worse? Like it can get worse, Adrien said as he got up to get dressed. Now you've said it, I do feel like it has the potential to get worse, the Kwame called. Adrien understood what Plag was saying, but he had to try. As soon as he was dressed, he went downstairs for breakfast, and then Natalie and his bodyguard drove him to school. His goodbye was muttered as he got out of the car, his mind focused only on one thing. He entered the courtyard and scanned it for his classmates. Predictably, Marinette had yet to arrive, but that was fine. It wasn't her he was looking for, as much as he wanted to see her right now so he could know if she was okay or not. And it was probably for the best she wasn't there for this. He couldn't see Lila anywhere in the courtyard, so he went into the locker room. Adrien saw her straight away, her locker open and putting some of the books from her bag inside. Thankfully, there weren't many other students in here right now, including Alia and the other girls. They would definitely try to stop Adrien from talking to her, but they would more than likely show up to school soon. He had to make this quick. Without any more hesitating, Adrien walked straight up to her. We need to talk. Lila looked up at him with a smirk. We do? I'm not sure I want to, Adrien. Lila, this is serious now. You're really hurting Marinette. I'm not saying you have to be nice to her. Just leave her alone. Never talk to her again. And leave her friends alone too. They don't need you messing with their heads. Lila closed her locker and leant against it, smirk still on her face. Oh yeah? I think it was necessary. Necessary? What's wrong with you? Alia called me last night. Adrien held in his groan. He knew exactly what Lila was about to say. Marinette had told her that she was Ladybug to try and get Alia to forgive her. Lila chuckled. She's pathetic. And you say I'm the liar. Don't you think that shows how desperate she is? Adrien shouted, annoyed that he had let Lila get to him enough to make him raise his voice. Does it look like I care? Lila shouted back, forgetting her simpering facade. You've taken all of her friends away, he said, calm at this time. He didn't want their shouting to make people come and investigate. Again, does it look like I care? She asked, her eyebrows raised, tone still as volatile at a lower volume. You're hurting her. Lila just shrugged, not bothering to repeat herself. And what are you willing to do to make me stop? She reached out, her finger tracing around the pocket on his white shirt before Adrien stepped away from her. Don't, he said. She just smiled, and the smile widened when she saw something over Adrian's shoulder. He turned and saw Marinette standing in the doorway to the locker room, looking between him and Lila. At the sight of her, he felt so happy, but he hadn't planned for her to see this. He didn't want her to get stressed at all, not after everything that had happened. We'll talk later, Lila said as she walked past him and went towards the door. Marinette moved to the side, giving Lila plenty of space to get out of the locker room, and as Lila's hand rested on the door handle, she turned to Marinette with a smirk. Good morning, she said, then added on the end, Ladybug. Marinette gasped and immediately looked over at Adrian, and he just smiled at her. She rushed over to him. I'm not Ladybug. What? Lila, she just said... Adrian smiled again. I didn't think you were. I mean, when do you have the time to be a Ladybug? You're helping everyone else, you have homework to do, and you're always designing something. There's no way you could be Ladybug, although you are just as awesome as her. She smiled at him, a light blush on her cheeks. Thanks, Adrian. What was that about, though? When I came in, you were shouting. Adrian had hoped Marinette hadn't heard that part. It's my fault. Her treating you like this. I told Lila if she didn't get you back into school, I'd tell everyone what she'd done. She knew everyone would believe me. So she got you back into school, and then turned everyone in our class against you instead. You're the one who got me back into school? She asked, still smiling. Well, yes, but now Alia... Adrian stopped talking the moment Marinette hugged him, and just wrapped his arms around her. Thank you, she said, the words coming out mumbled. He smiled down at her and rested his chin on top of her head. This hug was exactly like the ones he had given her last night, but this morning she seemed a lot calmer. Happy was the wrong word to use, but so was sad. Opening up to Cat Noir last night definitely helped her. I can't believe you, Adrian. Marinette tensed up in his arms, and Adrian looked up to see Alia at her locker. Alex stood beside her. His lady pulled out of the hug, but she stayed by his side, her gaze now averted to the floor. You can't believe what? He asked. That you're seriously still friends with Marinette after all that she's done, Alia replied. And I can't believe you seriously believe Lila, he shot back. After everything Marinette has done for you, this is how you repay her? She threw Lila down the stairs, Alex shouted. Do you seriously think she'd do that? Adrian shouted back. But Marinette stood in front of him then, one hand on his chest. Don't, she whispered. But just leave it, Adrian. He nodded and Alia huffed. Why are you listening to her? She's a liar. Adrian wanted to say more, but he held Marinette's gaze instead and she smiled at him. Alex sighed. Just leave them, Alia. They deserve each other. You're right about that, Alia said, and the two girls turned and left the locker room. I have no problem defending you, Adrian said as soon as the door shut. I know, but I don't want them all to hate you too. It seems Alia and Alex are already a lost cause. Marinette nodded, removing her hand from Adrian's chest, but she stared at his shirt. Sorry. What for? Touching you. Lila did it. You didn't like it. Yes, but you're not Lila, he replied. She bit her lip. I didn't hear what you said before she touched you. Why did she do it? Adrian just shrugged, but he had remembered what Lila had said. And what are you willing to do to make me stop? Combined with the touching, it seemed Lila was probably going to suggest Adrian dating her in return for stopping bullying Marinette. But he would never agree to that. Marinette would never forgive him for going over to Lila's side, nor would she be happy with him if she ever found out he'd done something like that to help her. Not that Adrian even thought he could force himself to date Lila, not when he was in love with Marinette, and not when he knew that she loved him back. It would break both of their hearts. All of this just because Adrian was in love with Marinette instead of Lila, and because they knew she was lying. It was ridiculous. Honestly, I'm not sure, he said, lying. He knew he was making her be honest with him, but it would make her upset if he told her what Lila had said, and the goal of this was to make her happy. Come on, get your things. Let's be early to class for once. Marinette rolled her eyes and went to her locker, and Adrian went to his. You know, I have been on time before. Yeah, maybe when you were 4 and your mum dropped you off. They both laughed as they grabbed their art supplies, and they walked up to the art room as the bell went. When they entered, the rest of their class was already there, half of them around one square table, the other half around the other square table. There was an extra desk at the back, much smaller though, and Adrian and Marinette sat at it, trying to ignore the scowls from their classmates. Do you think it'll be like this forever? Marinette asked. Honestly, I have no idea, but I'll be here for you. Thank you, Adrian. Their art teacher came in then carrying a stack full of brand new sketch pads, not surprised at how the students were sitting. He wasn't sure what had happened, but they'd been sat this way for a few weeks now, completely freezing out two of their classmates. Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be starting an art project. It'll all be done during class time, but it will be partner work, so we'll have to decide today who you're working with. Marinette, perhaps you'd like to work with Max? Absolutely not, Max said. Oh, well, Adrian, maybe you could work with Julica? She shook her head without any hesitation. I'll work with Marinette, if that's okay, Adrian said, smiling at their teacher. If no one wanted to work with them, then that was fine. And it meant he got not only Marinette's undivided attention in this class, but also her art skills. Apart from Nathaniel, she was by far the best in the class. Their teacher nodded and started handing out the sketch pads, coming over to Adrian and Marinette last. Is everything okay, he asked. Adrian nodded. It's fine. Do you agree with that statement, he said, looking over at Marinette. I don't see you in here at lunchtime anymore. She shrugged. It's just a personality clash. I'm sure things will work themselves out eventually. Realising the two teenagers wouldn't say any more, he went back up to the front of the room. You seem to be handling it better, Adrian remarked once their teacher was out of earshot. I guess I have to. It doesn't seem like things will be changing for a while. Unfortunately, as she spoke, Marinette started to look sad again, and Adrian took her hand in his under the desk. Well, I'll be here for you, even after things change back. Assuming they will. He squeezed her hand. They will. Okay, their art teacher said, getting everyone's attention. So it's one sketchbook between each pair, and each lesson, do as many as you can, complete each other's sketches. So one of you draws for a couple of minutes, and without knowing what the other person intended, take over drawing for them. But think outside of the box for this. There are no wrong answers. Marinette smiled then. This is going to be awesome. Is it? Adrian asked. He didn't mind art, but it certainly wasn't his favourite, and this project didn't sound all that thrilling to him. Definitely. We can do a lot with this, not just drawing. He said to think outside the box. We can do some painting, play with colour values and different tones. Like I can start the painting with all cool tones, and then you only paint in warm tones. And do you have any old photos of you modelling you don't like? Yeah, loads. Why? Bring them in for next class. We can cut them up into heads, torsos, legs and feet, and I pick a head and then you pick a random chest. It's the same concept as the assignments. Plus, I know you're not the best at drawing, so maybe doing some more abstract pieces for this will work more to your strengths. The passion in her voice was clear and Adrian couldn't help but smile. It was moments like this, when she was so enthusiastic and not even realising it, that he could feel his love for his lady the most. Still holding her hand, he squeezed it again. You're amazing. She laughed. It's just an art project. I know, but you are. He just needed to show her how much he meant that. Adrian straightened his shirt out in the bathroom mirror and Plag flew into the room, eyes narrowed. You are aware you're going to be transformed for the entire night? Marinette won't know if your shirt looks good or not. He rolled his eyes. Yes, thank you. Even so, Adrian continued to straighten out what he was wearing and checked his hair too. He knew Plag was right, for once, but he never knew. Tonight might be the night when Marinette asked him to reveal his identity. It was unlikely, but there was always a chance. It had been a couple of weeks since they'd started having their movie nights, and he loved every single one of them. They had about 2 a week, with patrols being moved to 3 times a week now, and Adrian enjoyed those nights with Marinette immensely, whether she appeared as herself or as Ladybug. Tonight was another movie night, and he had no idea what they were watching, but after a couple of weeks, he knew what snacks to buy. He finally left his appearance alone and went to check his phone. Thankfully, he'd been on a photo shoot this afternoon, and he'd removed all of the makeup now, but there was still product in his hair. If Marinette did pick tonight to find out who he was, he'd look good when she saw him. There were no notifications for Akuma attacks, so Adrian put his phone away and turned to Plag, who had followed him out of the bathroom. Ready? The Kwame sighed. You know, while these nights are fun for you, they aren't for me. I have to stay transformed the whole time. Jealous you don't get to spend time with Cheeky? Plag scowled. You know it's not like that. I know, just teasing. Plag, claws out. Once transformed, he dashed back into the bathroom to check his appearance, although it never changed in this form. He could get covered in glitter as Adrian, and it would all disappear as Cat Noir. He went back into his room and grabbed a €5 note from his wallet. Then he jumped out of his window and onto the garden wall. He took out his baton and vaulted onto the nearest rooftop opposite his bedroom window, and after running for a few blocks, he jumped back down to street level and went inside the nearest convenience store. He quickly grabbed a tub of ice cream, making sure he got Marinette's favourite flavour, and then he was off again, back up to the rooftops and on towards his lady's bakery. Her mood had definitely been improving, both around Cat Noir and Adrien. As Ladybug, she would rely on him much more in fights instead of doing everything herself, and as Marinette, she had been more open with how she was feeling. He just hoped things had been okay while he'd been gone today. He'd missed the final class of the day for a photo shoot, and Miss Bustier had handed him the work he needed to catch up on as he left the classroom. It was a simple geography class with no partner work required. Marinette should have been completely fine alone. Not that he didn't want to stay with her, he always wanted to be with her. He could already feel his heart doing little jumps in his chest as he saw the bakery in the distance. But she should have been free from being hurt by her former friends. He'd been at the photo shoot since leaving school until 6, then he'd gone home for dinner, done his homework, and now he was heading to Marinette's. In all that time, he'd taken his phone off silent, waiting for a text to chime in from Marinette to tell him she wasn't okay or that she needed to call him. All he'd got was a text to say she'd taken their art project home to finish the cover design on their sketchbook, a smiley face on the end. That was it. It seemed like everything had gone okay. He landed softly on Marinette's balcony, not wanting to be noisy and alert her parents that he was there. He didn't particularly want to face her dad again after the Weredad incident. What would Tom do if he knew that he and his daughter were having movie nights together? Adrien didn't want to find out. He opened the skylight and jumped down onto the bed, already relaxing in the cosy atmosphere. The blinds had all been closed, and some of the lights in the room were on, and they bounced off the pink walls, making the dim light look a little rosy. Marinette was sat on the chaise, already in her pyjamas and surrounded by blankets, and she looked up when she heard him come in, her eyebrows raised. "Do you have Patrick?" she asked. "What?" he said, utterly confused. "Do you have Patrick?" she repeated. "No? This is the Krusty Krab? This was a SpongeBob reference, right?" Marinette tutted. "You're fired." Cat Noir gaped at her and jumped down to the floor. "Excuse me, who do you think you are? Audrey Bourgeois? You're not going to Paris." He opened his mouth to express his confusion again, but then it dawned on him. The Devil Wears Prada. They'd watched it a couple of weeks ago. That was what she was referencing. "But I live in Paris," he exclaimed, going along with it now. "I have to go to Fashion Week. I've wanted to go for my entire life. Now I'll never get the chance to wear Dior. How will my life ever be complete without these Chanel boots? I need Miu Miu in my life." "Meow meow," Marinette shouted, and he gasped, realising he'd missed the chance for an epic pun. "Are you trying to out-pun me, Dupencheng?" She laughed and he smiled at the sound. It had been a while since he'd heard her laugh like that. "I could never." "Hey, kitty." He put the ice cream down on her desk. "Hi, princess." Before he could open his arms to pull her in for a hug like he always did, she was up from the chaise and burying herself against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and held her tight, not questioning it. Why would he? Having his lady in his arms was always wonderful. He'd become so used to hugging her as a greeting that he had to hold back his Adrien when he saw her at school. It wasn't that they didn't hug, but it wasn't their go-to greeting in civilian form. She pulled out of the hug, a light blush on her cheeks, and when he kissed her on the forehead, the blush got worse. He smirked. "You okay?" "Yeah, totally fine. Fine. Totally fine." She laughed a little, but he didn't comment further on it. Her stuttering was cute. "I didn't think you were the sort of person to have watched SpongeBob." He scoffed. "Of course I've seen SpongeBob. Who do you think I am?" It was a rhetorical question, but Marinette answered it anyway. "Genuinely, I have no idea." "Want to guess?" She rolled her eyes. "Haha, very funny, kitty cat." "He brought ice cream," Tiki shouted, and Cat Noir turned around to see Tiki hovering near the tub, tiny tongue darting out of her mouth. "And it's chocolate." He laughed and walked over to the Kwame. "Don't you get enough sweet treats living here? And the ice cream is for Marinette." He booped her gently on the nose, and Tiki giggled. "Where are the rest of the Kwames?" They all popped out from their hiding spots, and Cat Noir booped each one of them on the nose in turn. They were all so cute, and while it meant Marinette was never truly alone, the Kwames could never give her the support she needed. They meant well, but didn't know much about school bullies. "That was most of them," he muttered, turning around. "Where's Kalki?" The horse Kwame phased out of Marinette's mattress. "I do not take kindly to being poked on the nose." He held out his finger then, and Kalki gently touched her tiny hoof to his claw. "Satisfied?" he asked, and the horse calmly nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Noir." "Do we really have to keep calling you Cat Noir?" Mulo asked as she sat down on his shoulder. "It takes too long to say." "What about Kitty?" Jupu suggested. "No," Marinette said, and Cat Noir turned to her with an eyebrow raised. "Why not?" "Well," she stuttered, starting to blush again. "It's just, I call you Kitty." Daisy flew over to Marinette. "Are you jealous?" "What? No, just call him something else." The pig Kwame giggled in response, and the Kwames all flew off, going to inspect the tub of ice cream, and Cat Noir grabbed the Devil Wears Prada DVD from beside it. "I take it we're watching this again?" Marinette nodded and took it from him so she could load the disc into her computer. "I need it after today." "Oh, what happened?" he asked, leaning against the desk. In all the time he had been at school, everything had gone fine. Plus, of course, the last lesson could have gone badly, but she hadn't texted Adrian about it. She sighed and sat down in her desk chair. "It was something at school." "In class?" he asked, getting a little worried now. "No, after class. We're doing this art project and it's almost finished, but I told my partner I'd finish off the cover art for it," she said, pointing to the sketchbook on the desk. Adrian had seen it this morning during art class, and then the cover had been plain black. Now it was covered in paints, a mix of pink and yellow to represent the two of them. It was an abstract design to match the more abstract nature their project had taken, since Marinette discovered that Adrian really couldn't draw to save his life, hence why she was in charge of the cover and not him. It had been the right choice. It looked amazing. "Looks good. So what's the problem?" "I had to go and pick up the sketchbook at the end of the day. I've told you before about that girl who's telling everyone that I'm a liar. She cornered me. There was no one else there. She..." Marinette looked away from him as tears filled her eyes, and Cat Noir knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Princess, did she touch you?" She shook her head straight away, and he relaxed a little. But something bad had still happened. What did she say then? Marinette kept staring down at her lap. "She was just nasty. I only have one friend left, and if he's there, no one comes near me. But he wasn't, so she took her chance. She called me pathetic and stupid and ugly, and that I don't deserve to have any friends, and that's why she's taken them all away. And that she'd take Adrian away one day too." His jaw clenched out of reflex. He should have been there. If he'd stayed at school, he would have gone to the art room with her, and then this wouldn't have happened. It wasn't a threat per se. Lila hadn't been specific about how she was going to do any of that, but if it made his lady upset, then he was upset too. "I am so sorry, Princess. But you know none of that is true." "I feel like it is, though." He squeezed her hands. "Tell me why you think that, Princess." She rolled her lips together. "If I do, I'll start crying. Then I'll cataclysm the Akuma and recharge on the balcony. If you need to cry, cry. I'll keep you safe." She stared at him for a moment, and then her shoulders shook as she broke down into tears. Gently, he lifted her off the desk chair and onto the floor, holding her as she sobbed, the Kwames keeping an eye out for an Akuma. It wasn't fair that neither of them could get upset, but it was safer this way. When the crying subsided enough, Marinette took a few deep breaths, hands shaking as she wiped away her tears. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. "You've obviously been holding that in. Why don't you tell me how you're really feeling?" "It's not just about her," Marinette said. "It's about being guardian too." "That's okay. Tell me." She sniffed. It's so much responsibility. Being Ladybug was enough, but even then, it was hard. Before I got my Miraculous, I had a normal life. I would go to school, do my homework, help my parents, go out with my friends. Just normal things. I guess I didn't appreciate it at the time. But when I became Ladybug, I had to act like nothing had changed. But I had this huge secret and a huge responsibility. Adrian was completely the opposite. When he became Cat Noir, the only thing he had to give up were the excessive hours spent alone at home. His life had changed for the better when he had been given the Cat Miraculous. But Marinette already had a life. Being Cat Noir gave him freedom, but being Ladybug weighed her down. And now I'm the guardian, which is extra responsibility and extra pressure. What if my parents find the miracle box? Or someone else? I'm always paranoid. And it's my fault Master Fu isn't here. If I hadn't been so careless. She covered her face as she started to cry again, and Cat Noir hugged her again. You didn't do it on purpose, though. He couldn't say it wasn't her fault, because it was. But she hadn't intended for Hawkmoth to see her. I know, but I wish he was here still, and then maybe none of this would have happened. She wiped away her tears again. Well, it would have. That girl at school has nothing to do with being guardian. She makes me feel like I'm nothing, like I'm worthless. Every time she looks at me, she makes me feel like I'm something she's just stepped in. And I'm Ladybug, yet she looks at me like that. Before I met her, I felt so strong. I used to be like, okay, going to school, homework, friends, parents, being Ladybug. I can do it all. But now, I'm not so sure. She has so much power, which sounds silly when she's just a schoolgirl and I have a box full of magical jewellery. But she's taken almost everyone away from me and I feel so powerless around her. And I'm lonely. So lonely. I know I have you and the Kwamis, but I don't know how to describe it. I feel hollow inside. Like I'm empty. Like all of this has taken every part of me. She'd stopped crying now, and Cat Noir just stared at her. He'd thought Marinette was getting better with their movie nights and patrols and with Adrien at school, but she'd just been holding it all in. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want you to hate me. You spend so much time with me, but every time you leave, I just get lonely again. I feel so isolated. And team with what's going on at school, it's too much. If it was just one thing, maybe I could handle it. But being Ladybug and saving Paris and being Guardian and protecting the Miracle Box and with what's going on at school, I don't think I can do it, Kitty. You can, he said, taking her hands in his again. I know you can. You are the most amazing and brilliant and wonderful person I have ever met. Am I though? What if Lila is right? I do only have one friend left at school. Maybe I don't deserve him. He squeezed her hands. That's not true. Adrien, you said? You mean Adrien Agreste? She nodded, the tears from her eyes gone now. He's a model, right? I'm surprised you're friends with him. Isn't he a bit vain, he asked. Marinette glared at him. No, not at all. He's the kindest person I've ever met. I'm sure other people would let fame get to their heads, but not him. Never Adrien. He's so sweet to me, even after his first day at school. There was gum on my chair and he was trying to get it off, but I was rude to him because I thought he had put it there. I wouldn't even let him explain at first, but he kept trying, and even after I'd been rude to him, he gave me his umbrella so I wouldn't have to walk in the rain for the 10 seconds it takes me to get home from school. He does things like that all the time, and not just for me, for everyone. As she talked about him, a cute blush overcame her face, and Cat Noir's smile got wider and wider. Hearing her talk about him like this was the cutest. Why are you smiling, she asked, suspicious now. Well, you show me just how much you appreciate him, which shows me just how much you do deserve to have him as your friend. Marinette, you know that girl is manipulating everyone else, and while that is horrible, and I'd be as upset as you are if it was happening to me instead, it sounds like Adrien is really there for you. Does he know about what happened today? She shook her head. No, I didn't want to worry him. He can be very protective over me, which is wonderful. I feel really safe at school with him there. And he's told me loads that I can text him about whatever, whenever. But if he knew that Lila had said something like this to me, I can't imagine what he'd say to her at school tomorrow. The problem is, his father is really strict. And if he finds out about this, I'm worried he'll pull Adrien from school, and then I won't be able to see him at all. He nodded, understanding her concerns. He'd never considered that himself, but if his father did find out he was being isolated in his class, he wouldn't be very happy. Perhaps it was for the best Adrien didn't know about everything, but as long as Marinette opened up to Cat Noir about it, then that was still good. You want him to stay in school? Yeah, he's my only friend. You sure that's the only reason? He asked with a smirk. Her blush got worse. Well, we're friends. Cat Noir laughed. So Adrien Agreste is the boy I'm competing with for your feelings. Marinette's shoulders slumped again. There's no competition. He doesn't like me back. How do you know? Well, why would he? I'm me. And you are amazing. He brought her hands up and placed a kiss on her knuckles. It was obvious that tonight, after what had happened with Lila, Marinette was in a rut, and she wasn't going to easily come out of it. Which was no surprise at all. It sounded like Lila had been absolutely horrible to her, and unable to have an emotional outburst, Marinette had kept it all inside her, along with everything else she had been feeling lately. He would just have to distract her with the film. Come on, or the ice cream will melt. Or Tiki will eat it. Hey, the Kwame shouted, and Marinette smiled at that. Yeah, sorry. Just remember, you're amazing. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, and another blush was present on her cheeks when he pulled away. Part of him wanted to believe that all of her blushing and stuttering tonight were signs that Marinette was falling for Cat Noir, but he knew that probably wasn't true. She was probably just glad of his company. He stood up, pulling Marinette with him, but with the way they had been sitting, they ended up stood practically chest to chest, Marinette staring up at him, inches away from his face. He'd only ever been this close to her when she'd had a mask on, and he'd always known she was pretty. That didn't change at this distance, but he never knew she had freckles. He was close enough that he could count them. Her bluebell eyes briefly flicked down to look at his lips, then she blushed and backed away from him. "I'll just go and get some spoons. She laughed and went through the hatch, but Cat Noir didn't move, just stood staring at where Marinette had been. Why hadn't she moved away as soon as they stood up? She hadn't seemed uncomfortable being that close to him, but why did she look at him like that? She couldn't have feelings for him. There was no way. Tiki flew into his line of vision then. "After the film, we need to talk." He just nodded, then finally started moving. The film had loaded up on the monitor by now, so he carefully placed it on the desk chair and wheeled it over to the chaise, at the right angle so they could see it. He settled into his usual position on the chaise, sitting against the backrest and getting comfortable in the mounds of blankets. Marinette came back then, holding 2 spoons. She closed the hatch, grabbed the ice cream, then came to sit next to him. Without any hesitation, she leaned against him, and he smiled down at her. He loved these movie nights, just the 2 of them together like this, but they weren't making her as happy as he had hoped. What else could he do to support her? "Stomp, can you press play?" Marinette asked. The Ox Kwame obliged, and the Kwames all settled in a huddle on the floor to watch the movie. Marinette handed Cat Noir a spoon, and like every time they had a movie night, they made quick work of the frozen desserts, and once disposed of, Marinette would wrap a blanket around their shoulders, joining them together. Cat Noir had never thought much of it. He was in love with her, so, of course, he enjoyed it. But he knew Marinette had always felt comfortable around him, as she was Ladybug and trusted him with her life. But after all of her blushing tonight, and whatever it was that had happened before, he was unsure what to think. He tried to ignore it for now and concentrate on the film. Even though he was a model, he didn't care all that much for fashion, but The Devil Wears Prada was enjoyable without needing to have a vested interest in Vogue. But even though Marinette did have an interest in Vogue, her head started to loll against his shoulder when Andy arrived at the charity benefit, and she was sound asleep by the time the characters landed in Paris. It wasn't a surprise. Marinette had seen this movie loads of times, and she'd had a rough day, and she'd almost had a panic attack. She was probably exhausted. "Pollen, pause the film," Cat Noir whispered, and once the bee Kwame had done, he gently shifted Marinette around until he could get one of his hands under her knees. Trix and Bark lifted the blankets off them so Cat Noir could stand, then he carefully climbed the steps to Marinette's bed. Roar and Waze went ahead and pulled her bed sheets back, and Cat Noir gently laid her down, the Kwames then covering their guardian. Cat Noir knelt beside her for a moment, staring down at her. She looked peaceful like this. He could imagine that nothing was upsetting her, that the only responsibility she had was homework. Just looking at her, you'd never think she was the saviour of Paris. He wished he could protect her, both from Lila and from Shadow Moth. She didn't deserve to go through all of this pain. He gently brushed her hair to the side and kissed her on the forehead. "I'm here for you," he whispered. "Together, we can do this. Good night, my lady." He kissed her again, then he precariously exited through the skylight, the Kwames leaving after him. He made sure the window was secure, then threw the cushion sitting on the deck chair on top of it. "Is it okay if I de-transform?" he asked. "Plag needs a break." Sass nodded in response. "Plag, claws in." The cat Kwame let the transformation drop with a groan. Even though he hadn't used his power, being transformed for that long was still tiring. The other Kwames all went to give him a hug, and Plag soon perked up. Adrian just wished helping Marinette was that easy. The Kwames broke up and all hovered in front of Adrian. "As you saw, she's still really sad," Tiki said, "but she's trying her best to hide it, both so she doesn't get akumatized, and so she doesn't make you or Cat Noir worried." He nodded sadly. "I guessed. But I really don't know what else I can do. Of course I want to help, and I'm trying my best. I don't want her to feel like this. I love her." The Kwames all nodded. They knew how hard he was trying. "We really don't know what to suggest for the best," Waze said. "However, you being the one to cheer her up is also presenting more problems," Bark said, blunt as ever. "What do you mean? How is he making it worse?" Tiki sighed. "I think Marinette might have developed feelings for you. As in, Cat Noir." Adrian's heart thumped a little. He knew Marinette had feelings for him, Adrian aggressed, but not for his alter ego. And he had suspected it a little tonight, but he didn't want to get his hopes up. "Stop smiling," Bark said, glaring at him. "This isn't about you." "Sorry," Adrian said. Bark was right. Marinette didn't need a boyfriend right now. It would just add even more pressure. She just needed someone in her corner, which he was doing, but it wasn't enough to help her. I'm not 100% sure though, Tiki said. I mentioned it the other day to her, and she just blushed and said no. But she kept stuttering tonight in front of you, and then the way she looked at you after you stood up together. Right now, I think she's just a little confused. She's in love with you, that's for sure, but I don't know if what she feels for Cat Noir is real, or she thinks she is because of the extra attention you've been giving her, and now she's confused because of the way she feels about Adrien. Either way, you do make her happy. Daisy nodded. She's the happiest when you're with her, either version of you. But she's still so sad, Mulo said, her mouse ears dropping. Her memories of Cat Blanc are making her nervous, Long added. I will never let that happen, Adrien said. He wasn't sure he could promise it, since only Bunnix knew what had caused it, but he'd try his hardest to never get akumatized. Tiki started, then looked away. She had known Marinette the longest. This was the most upsetting to her. Adrien held out his hand to her, and she sat on it. What is it? I'm scared that she'll quit being guardian. All of the Kwamis' heads drooped as she said it. They had all obviously been thinking about that too, and Adrien instantly knew what that meant. Marinette would forget absolutely everything. Being Ladybug, her parents, school, him. He couldn't let that happen either. Okay, I'll think of something to show her just how much I care about her and will help her. I need to get some sleep though, but if you need anything, any of you, you know where to find me. The Kwamis all nodded, and once they had said their goodbyes, they all phased back into Marinette's room. Adrien removed the cushion from the skylight and looked down at Marinette. She was sound asleep, looking fairly content. How did he get his brilliant lady back? The one who always faced danger head-on and wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. He had to show her that he had her back and that she could truly trust him. Action spoke louder than words, and coming over for a movie wasn't cutting it, not with everything going on, and he wanted it to be something she would enjoy too. What could he do? An idea started to form in his head, and he smiles. What are you thinking, kid? Plag asked. Wait and see. It took a while for Adrien's plan to be ready. He had to talk to Tiki a couple of times to make sure what he had in mind was okay, and then he needed her help for a few things too. It took a couple of weeks for it all to be ready, and in that time they continued with their patrols and movie nights, with Marinette crying whenever she needed to, knowing he would cataclysm the Akuma. She still wasn't happy though, no matter how much she pretended she was. So when the final item he needed to execute his plan arrived, Adrien was thrilled. He transformed, then grabbed the box with Marinette's dress in, and he ran to her house as fast as he could. It was a Monday night. They didn't meet to patrol on a Monday, nor was it a movie night, so he wasn't surprised by the confused but cute pout on Marinette's face when she opened the skylight. Is everything okay? She asked, eyebrows furrowed in concern. He nodded, making sure he was smiling so he wouldn't worry her. She clocked the box he had tucked under his arm and climbed up onto her balcony. What's that? It's for you. It's a dress. A dress? What for? For tomorrow night. If you'll come, that is. Marinette laughed nervously. I think I need some more information, Kitty. He put the dress box down on the table. He really should have practiced what he was going to say. So, I know you're feeling sad. I know you're still struggling. And I know you don't like telling me, so I don't feel like everything I've done has been wasted. But this year has been hard for both of us. We deserve a treat. Especially you. So I've been planning something. Tomorrow night, I'd like for you to meet me for dinner. And then a dance. You don't need to think about anything. Just put the dress on and show up. For one night. It'll be just me and you. No responsibilities. Marinette glanced at the dress box, then up at Cat Noir. Why? He chuckled. What do you mean? I don't understand what it's for. Because I want to show you how much I truly do love and appreciate you, and show you that you're not alone, that I'm here for you. You're amazing, Marinette. I want to show you how I see you. Happy tears filled her eyes. Are you sure, Kitty? Cat Noir nodded. He wanted his beautiful and brilliant lady back. He didn't want to see her cry ever again. He wanted her to feel as magnificent as she had the first time she had ever done a miraculous ladybug. I'm sure. So, will you say yes? You should have told me, but I'm not She's not hangry. You should have told me, but I'm not hangry.